Good evening. How are you all this evening? Excellent. Oh, good. I need that. Welcome to 1948. My name is Vera Atkins, and I am so pleased to come amongst you today to talk about a subject dear to my heart. I have carried the burden of secrets for so long, it will be quite wonderful to share them with you. Oh, I do hope I've piqued your curiosity. I am here in my capacity as second in command to the head of F Section, Britain's SOE, Special Operations Executive. And this was the competition, really, of MI6. Do you all know of MI6? Excellent. Well, my mission tonight is to apprise you of some American women who helped serve the cause and defeat the Nazis, and of course the Japanese, during World War II. Some whose names you may not know, but some I know you do. Now, around the globe who also fought, but I thought you might be particularly interested in hearing about your compatriots. I think it important, actually crucial, that we remember their sacrifices and their contributions. As Dwight Eisenhower said, resistance actions played a considerable part in our complete and final victory. Now, there are many who would love to know what I'm going to tell you tonight, not least of all about myself. I was born in Romania, actually, in 1908, and I never talked about that because I didn't want my foreign origins to jeopardize my career. I was also a Jewess by birth, something else I rarely mentioned. Frankly, it wasn't a good time to be. And I never married nor had children, as that most definitely would have hampered my career. Am I right, ladies? Yes. So I entered the secretive world of sabotage and resistance at the very beginning, when Winston Churchill surreptitiously gave his assent to the creation of the SOE, enjoining us to set Europe ablaze. We were all amateurs at this game, more or less, but determined that Germany would not continue her domination of Europe. So, when Germany occupied France, the goal became sabotage, resistance, and infiltration. The SOE trained British civilians to be parachuted into France, there to connect with French civilians and those already involved in the French resistance. And my job was to recruit those recruiters. I met them through friends of friends, parties and whatnot. I never told them what I was about, but I always made note of those whom I thought might make good officers or agents. So I am told that a certain author by the name of Ian Fleming used me as his inspiration for his Miss Moneypenny character. Do any of you know those books? James Bond books? Oh, yes. Well, you'll have to tell me if I remind you of Miss Moneypenny then. What do you think? I remind you of her? Okay. Well, in any case, I joined the SOE initially in a secretarial capacity in 1941, despite not being a British national. But I quickly rose to become the head of the assistant to the head of F Section, F for France, Colonel Maurice Buckmaster. Buckmaster trusted me for my integrity, my good organizational skills, and my exceptional memory. I always liked to wear skirt suits, and I've always been a lifelong smoker. Always wondered if they'd kill me, these things, but actually it turned out that I succumbed to a MRSA infection in hospital. In the year 2000, at the age of 92. So much for lung cancer. But in any case, my primary role, as I mentioned, was related to the recruitment and deployment of British agents into occupied France after strenuous commando training. And the initial training took place at a 16th century country home where they were completely cut off from the outside world. They had no contact whatsoever. This was followed by commando training in the Scottish Highlands, where they learned about guns and explosives. And then there was a survival course in Hampshire, and then parachute training near Manchester. And I specifically taught them how to get around in France with the regulations and the curfews and whatnot. And what we did was we would take clothing that we had gathered from refugees from France, and we would fill the pockets with French tickets and mementos and letters and keepsakes, what have you. And I could often be found somewhere in the back stitching French tags into the clothing if they weren't already there. And we changed out all of their dental fillings to the French style, because you never knew when that one small detail might save an agent's life. When we thought that they were ready, we would parachute them into France. There they would be met by reception committees, where they would be whisked off to a safe house, there to receive their orders over the French BBC. There would be coded personal messages that would give them their orders. I accompanied my agents, generally, to the airfield, especially the female agents, whom I considered my girls. I did my best to protect them during the war, but at the end of it, only 3/4 of them returned to us. After the war, I went to France and to Germany to discover what had happened, because I just felt that it was such a terrible thing to be declared missing, presumed dead. So terrible for their families. So while I was there, I discovered that I was actually quite good at interrogation. And much of what I learned from those Nazis was used against them at the Nuremberg trials to convict them. So unfortunately, I did learn that some of my girls did perish in the concentration camps, and a few were burned alive. So I prefer not to talk about the horrors of the concentration camps, preferring to leave some things in the past, so no more about me. I am particularly here tonight to talk to you about a special American woman. You see, I had been put in charge of the 37 female agents who would be the couriers and the wireless operators, the most dangerous job, for all of the circuits that we had established. Now, the recruits themselves were made up of a remarkable cross-section of society. We had bankers and playwrights and taxi cab drivers, shop girls. We even had a princess. And because all of us who were involved in this had to speak French fluently, most of those chosen were half French British citizens, with one remarkable exception. And this was the Virginia Hall. Now, Virginia Hall, I thought she was just amazing, and she was the most modest person that I had ever met. She would never boast about her accomplishments, so I am here to do it for her. Virginia Hall was the first woman to be infiltrated into Vichy France, and the greatest of all American spies, in my humble opinion, which actually isn't humble at all, as I am never wrong. Not only was Virginia a spy for the SOE, she also then became an agent for the American OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was created by FDR. And then, when that morphed into the CIA, she also worked for them. Now, during the war, the Gestapo considered her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. Now, Virginia was born in Baltimore in 1906, 2 years before I, and she was born into a rather well-off Baltimore family. I think they had a townhome in Baltimore and then a farm outside of Baltimore. She was quite a tomboy. She liked to play sports and ride horses and hunt. But she was brilliant as well, attending the prestigious Radcliffe College and Barnard College, which I believe is Columbia University now. Is that right? So she studied, yes, I'm not sure what it's called now, but she studied French, Italian, and German, and convinced her parents that it was absolutely necessary for her to study in Europe, and convinced them to give her the money to do so. So she went to France and Austria and Germany to continue her studies. Her goal was to become a diplomat, and to work in the Foreign Service. And so to this end, she managed to get herself a position as a clerk at the American Embassy in Warsaw, Poland. Now, unfortunately, there was a tragedy during this time. She was hunting with some friends in Turkey, and they were crossing a field. And have you ever seen the fields that they have the barbed wire running across? Well, they were spreading the barbed wire so that they could step through. And Virginia had her rifle under her arm. And unfortunately, it went off, and she shot herself in the leg. So by the time they were able to get her back to civilization, shock and gangrene had set in, and they had to amputate just below the knee. She was fitted with a wooden appendage, which she called Cuthbert. I don't know why. Remind me to tell you a funny story about Cuthbert. But this effectively ended any hopes that she had for being a diplomat because, according to the letter that she received from the State Department, we don't employ cripples. So she quit the State Department and she went to France, to Paris, where she was working as a reporter when war broke out in 1939. So she immediately joined the ambulance corps, and she was then, when the fighting stopped that summer, she was caught in Vichy, France. So she quickly made her way back across the Channel to London, where I met her at a party. And I was very impressed, not so much with her French, because, you know, the American accent and all that, no offense, but she was so bright and so discreet. And she was really determined to do something for the cause. And so we trained her, and the training was very difficult. I have to tell you that. We did try to train them to react well and to keep up their false identities if they were caught by the Gestapo. And we tried to make that training as realistic as possible. So once that training was done, she was infiltrated into France in August of 1941, where she spent the next 15 months connecting with the French underground, organizing the circuits, parachute drops, all sorts of things, eluding the SS on multiple occasions. She became a master of disguise, or a mistress of disguise, I suppose I should say. And she was known by the Gestapo, but they thought that she was a French-Canadian. Oh, and here's the funny story about Cuthbert. They thought she was a French-Canadian who was being assisted by a male spy, because of course women can't do any of this on their own, right? And his name was Cuthbert. Because Virginia would contact us and she would say she needed socks, clean socks for Cuthbert, to protect her stump, you know. And so in any case, she was called the Limping Lady by the Gestapo, and she was quite upset by that moniker because she thought she'd done a good job of hiding her limp. But in any case, she was very successful. But finally, when Germany took over all of France, she had to escape in 1942. And do you know how downed airmen and outed spies would escape from France? They would have to go over the Pyrenees Mountains. And so in November, in the middle of winter, Virginia Hall escaped over the mountains on a wooden leg. She arrived with 2 companions in Spain and was immediately arrested. It took us weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, working with the American embassy to free her, and she finally made it back to London, where I had Christmas dinner with her, and we celebrated her successes. Now, she was very quietly awarded the Order of the British Empire. And do you know what happens when you're awarded the Order of the British Empire? There's a ceremony, and you get to meet the king. Well, she didn't want to do that. And the reason why was because she knew that there would be photographers and reporters there, and she didn't want to blow her cover. So meanwhile, she had discovered that in 1942, FDR had initiated the OSS. And I'm going to kill you with acronyms tonight. But anyway, she wanted to join the American organization, which was completely understandable. And she scarcely needed training. But what we did do was we trained her on the wireless. And I do have a picture that I'd like to share with you. I have a few things, actually, I'd like to share with you. So let me get those out. All right, so I have a couple of these that we'll pass around. So let me keep one. So, hey, if you could just take one, maybe share with a partner and then pass them back, that would be so helpful. Thank you very much. So this is Virginia Hall as she was during the war. And here she is. This is a painting that was done depicting her working the wireless equipment and hiding in a small farmhouse in France. And then here, this is William Donovan, who was the head of the OSS, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So this wireless equipment here, the reason why this was such a dangerous job was because if you were caught by the Gestapo with wireless equipment, you had no explanation. You were a spy. So you would either be shot on sight, or you would be arrested, tortured, and then probably shot. So this was extremely dangerous. And also the Nazis had perfected a technique where they had equipment in a van that they would drive around, and this equipment could detect wireless equipment. So they could get very close to you. And you could never stay in one place for very long. The life expectancy for wireless operators at that time was 6 months. So yes, a very, very dangerous job. So in any case, she decided to adopt a new disguise as an agent of the OSS. So it's sort of a funny story. She was sitting with some of the officers, and they were discussing how they were going to get her into France. And she excused herself. She went off, and then the officers see this woman coming towards them, this old woman, and she's dragging along a suitcase, and they're saying, "Oh, ma'am, you can't be here. This is secret information." And it was Virginia Hall. They didn't even recognize her. So what she had done was she had layered herself up with lots of clothing, disguised herself as an old woman, and she was dragging along that suitcase. Now, what was in the suitcase? Not clothes, but wireless equipment. So as she was dragging the suitcase, it would hide her limp. So I thought that was quite brilliant. So she was sent into France on a British torpedo boat, because obviously she couldn't be parachuted into France. And her code name was Diane. She spent the next 2 months there. She received 22 parachute drops, organized and received 22 parachute drops. She sent 37 messages of vital importance to the Allies. She and her group killed 170 Nazis and took 800 more prisoner. So, very effective. Because of this, when a victory was declared in 1945, William Donovan, who was the head of OSS, was doing this ceremony because the new president, Truman, he had awarded her the Distinguished Service Cross, and it was the only one awarded to a civilian woman during World War II. And Truman wanted a public ceremony, but Virginia sent him a telegram saying, "Still operational, most anxious to get busy." So the only person there was her mother, taking this photograph. So yes, so that's William Donovan pinning the Distinguished Service Award on Virginia Hall. Now, her name is Guyot, Virginia Hall Guyot, because when she came back to the United States, she eventually married a fellow OSS officer by the name of Paul Guyot. And the two of them eventually worked for the CIA in the Special Activities Division for France. And then she retired, I believe, in 1966 to a farm. She died in Maryland. And so that's that. Very exciting, right? So now Virginia Hall was not the only American to work for the OSS. And I wonder, are there any tennis enthusiasts in the room? Anyone interested in tennis? No? Okay, because otherwise I thought maybe you would know this person, but maybe not. Okay, this woman's name is Alice Marble. No? Nothing yet? Okay. Yes? You know the name? Ah, all right then. So I've got a couple of pictures here, so we'll pass them around. Now, Alice Marble, she was born in California, and she was a cute little girl. Let me get a couple more pictures. And she was quite a tomboy, just like Virginia Hall. Here we go. There's a few more. And she really liked to play baseball. But her brother convinced her to take up the more ladylike tennis, which she did, and she excelled at it and won many junior championships. But then she had a terrible thing happen to her. She was raped by a stranger at the age of 15. Now, she bounced back from that and went on to win a junior championship, and she continued playing tennis. Then when she retired from tennis, she went to work for an organization that you probably know called DC Comics. She was an associate editor on the Wonder Woman series. Do you know Wonder Woman? And then she also wrote her own comics called The Wonder Women of History. So I have a couple here. I'll pass those around. There we go, if you could just pass those back. So here you have, she would take famous women from history. Here we have Florence Nightingale. And she would tell the story, but in comic book form, so that children would learn about important women. Don't you think she was quite ahead of her time? So, yeah, there you go. So, during the war, Alice had been married to a pilot by the name of Joe Crawley. And she was expecting their first child when she was involved in a very serious car accident. And when she was in hospital, she learned that her husband was KIA, killed in action over Germany. And because of the car accident, she lost the baby that she was carrying. Can you imagine? So, with these two tragedies, she tried to commit suicide. She failed, thankfully, but I suppose American intelligence thought, well, she doesn't mind dying, so they recruited her. And her mission was to reconnect with a former lover who was a Swiss banker so that she could get financial information about how the Nazis were moving funds around Europe. Now, the mission was going as planned until a Nazi operative discovered her and shot her in the back, which she survived. And no one knew any of this until after her death. Isn't that incredible? Now, not only was she a hero of World War II, but the American Tennis Association, I don't know if you're aware of this, was rather racist at the time, not allowing any blacks, male or female, to participate in any of the Grand Slam events. So Alice Marble took up her pen as a weapon and wrote editorials slamming, no pun intended, the American Tennis Association for this practice, stating that if not all the best players could participate, was it really a valid competition? And so finally they conceded, and in 1950, Althea Gibson became the first black person, male or female, to not only participate in, but also win a Grand Slam event. Isn't that wonderful? Now, speaking of African-American women, I would be remiss if I did not talk to you about a very important African-American woman who was absolutely vital during World War II. Now, I'm sure you know her name. She was an actress, a singer, a performer, stage and screen. She had gone to France because of racism here in America to pursue her career, and she was an absolute darling of France. And do you know her name? Oh, very good. Oh, we have a bright crowd tonight. All right, so if you could just pass those back. There we go. So yes, Josephine Baker. She was approached by the Free French when the war broke out in 1939, and they said, look, you're going to be invited probably to all the parties with all the upper echelon of the Gestapo. Could you go and could you listen for any information, anything that will help us? She agreed to do this, and not only did she agree to do that, but she also opened her home, the Chateau de Milande in the south of France, to people who were fleeing France. She helped people get visas. She agreed to spy not only in France, but then she used her health as an excuse to go abroad. And when the North African theater was opened, she went there and traveled all over Spain and all of that to try to get information about transports, harbors, train shipments, all this sort of thing. And the information would be written in invisible ink on her sheet music. And for specially sensitive information, she would pin it inside her underpants. Yes, depending on her celebrity to avoid a strip search. Isn't that brave? And smart, yes, very good. So, not only did she do all of these things, but you know, the American soldiers had an organization called the USO that provided entertainment and things. Well, the French and the British had no such thing. So Josephine Baker organized all of her friends who were performers, and they gave concerts for free to the troops. And she was fondly remembered by them afterwards. So after the war, she was awarded the Croix de Guerre, the Rosette de la Résistance, and she was made a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur by Charles de Gaulle himself. So she was not the only performer, though, to help during the war. Now I'm going to tell you about a little girl, a little German girl, and you'll find out why we're talking about her. So this little girl was named Maria Magdalena, but her family all called her Lena. But she was a very headstrong little girl, and she decided when she was 11 years old that she didn't want to be called Lena anymore. So she took the first part of her first name and the last part of her second name and put them together, and she became Marlene. Marlene Dietrich. Yes. So you might ask, well, Marlene Dietrich is German, so why are we talking about her? Now, what happened was, when the Nazis came into power, she was already famous in Germany, and they approached her and asked her to do propaganda for the Nazi party. She had very strong political opinions, which happened to run in the opposite direction of the Nazis. So she packed up her bags, she came to America, and immediately became an American citizen. So by the time America joined the war in 1941, she was already an American citizen. So Marlene Dietrich, she was asked by the OSS to work for them by recording music, not only in English, but also in German, and this was to attack the morale of the German soldiers. And I'll explain that in just a moment. Now, she went and did concerts all over the place, and in fact, many of the performers who were with her said, she's going to get us killed, because she didn't just do performances away from the front lines. She was actually close to the front lines. And do you know she raised, they say, that she raised more money in war bonds than any other celebrity? I would have thought Bob Hope, right? Yes. So getting back to this, William Donovan, whose picture you have here, had asked her and told her why they were going to record her music. So we're going to sing tonight one of her most favorite songs, one of her most famous and popular songs. And it's very interesting. I'm going to pass this out. So especially the men here. She's got a very deep voice, so we need you all singing along. Okay, so I think that's enough for this side. I feel like a teacher. There we go. So you'll see that on the left, you have the German version. And then in the middle, you have the one that we're going to do tonight, which is the one you probably are most familiar with. And then there was a special version that was written for the Special Air Service, for the Brits. Now, what's interesting, I don't know how many of you read German, but if you listen to the German version, it's very sad. And it's all about, if I die, if I never come back, who will be waiting under the lantern for you, this sort of thing. And the English version, the American version, is all about, it's very martial, and so it's interesting to listen to the two versions back to back. So we're going to sing, if I can figure out this fancy contraption here. All right, are you ready? Can everyone hear? Outside the barracks, by the corner light, I always stand and wait for you at night. We will create a world for two. I'll wait for you the whole night through. For you, Lily Marlene. For you, Lily Marlene. Bugler tonight, don't play the call to arms. I want another evening with its charms. Then we will say goodbye and part. I'll always keep you in my heart. With me, Lily Marlene. With me, Lily Marlene. Give me a rose to show how much you care. Tied to the stem, a lock of golden hair. Surely tomorrow you'll feel blue, but then will come a love that's new. For you, Lily Marlene. For you, Lily Marlene. Now we have the obligatory accordion music, so that we can feel ourselves in France at a Parisian cafe, having our breakfast of cigarette and coffee. And now we're all marching. When we are marching in the mud and cold, and when my pack seems more than I can hold, my love for you renews my might. I'm warm again, my pack is light. It's you, Lily Marlene. It's you, Lily Marlene. Very slowly now. My love for you renews my might. I'm warm again. My pack is light. It's you, Lily Marlene. It's you, Lily Marlene. Voila. Oh, that was wonderful. You should give yourselves a round of applause. Bravo, bravo. Now, that organization that she was working for, with William Donovan, it was called the Morale Operations Branch of the OSS. And William Donovan himself congratulated and thanked her for her efforts, because she was really the only performer who knew exactly what was happening with that music. It was being broadcast on what was being called the black radio, and the Nazis were trying to keep that from being heard by their soldiers, but they were a little bit unsuccessful. Now, the Morale Operations Branch was a very interesting branch, because what they did was they focused on morale, and they focused on disseminating false information. I think you refer to that as fake news. Yes. So another woman that actually worked for the Morale Operations Branch, you might not know her name. In fact, you probably don't. She died quite recently, actually. And her name was Elizabeth Pete McIntosh, or Betty. And she was born in Hawaii, and her parents were journalists. And so when war broke out on December 7th, 1941, guess where Betty was? In Pearl Harbor, yes. So she went to work also for Scripps Howard as a journalist. She was sent to Washington to cover Eleanor Roosevelt and war activities. But the Morale Operations Branch, the OSS, decided to recruit her because, interestingly, she was fluent in Japanese. So she was recruited to work creating false news reports, postcards, letters, all sorts of things that would be disseminated to the enemy and thereby lowering the Japanese morale. Now, what's interesting about Betty is that after the war, she wrote a book called Undercover Girl in 1947. But then, in, I think, the 90s, she wrote another book, which was called The Sisterhood of Spies, and I have here, which I can pass around. I'll pass it around later. Right here. Sisterhood of Spies, which talked about all of the women who were involved in the OSS that she worked with. And one of those was someone who I know you know, and I'm going to give you a hint. She was too tall to join either the Wax or the Waves. Julia Child! Yes, very good, very good. So Julia Child, she joined the OSS, initially, of course, in a secretarial capacity, because, of course, ladies, we all know that's all we're good for, right? But because of her education, her position, her intelligence, it was quickly recognized that she could do more than just that. She was in charge of handling a huge volume of classified information. But she particularly worked in research and development with William Donovan, that you saw the picture of. And she wasn't cooking at that time. Well, no, that's not true. They were cooking up something, just not anything you would want to eat. So you know that the Americans were very worried about the German U-boats, right? And they even created the intercoastal waterway because of it. And so the Americans were putting ordnance, big bombs, in the water just in case the U-boats would come too close to American shores. And the Americans discovered that sharks are very much like cats. Curiosity kills the cat, curiosity kills the sharks. So they would see the ordnance and they would come close to discover what it was, and boom, they would blow themselves and this very expensive ordnance up. So Julia Child, working alongside William Donovan in research and development, came up with shark repellent to put around the ordnance to keep the sharks away. And then, of course, she met fellow OSS officer Paul Child. They married in Pennsylvania. He was a New Jersey native, actually. He was a poet. He'd lived in Paris for many years, and he was known for his culinary knowledge. And he introduced Julia to French cuisine, and the rest is history. Now, how many of you have one of Julia Child's cookbooks, or your mother or grandmother? How many of you watched her on television? Oh, yes, wonderful. So these are just a few of the thousands of women who participated in fighting the Nazis and the Japanese during World War II. And for anyone who's interested, I do have a couple of books just to get you started on your trip of journeying down through history, if you want to take a picture of this. There are so many stories out there, so many books, women from all over the globe that fought. And I think it's very important that we remember their contributions, because so often they're overlooked. And for many years, no one knew anything about what these women did because most of it was classified information, and they weren't allowed to talk about it. So just now, we're starting to hear lots of different things. And I encourage you to read more. And I'm also going to talk about another book. I believe it's called The Only Girl in the Room, or The Only Woman in the Room, and it's about Hedy Lamarr. And the reason I don't talk about her specifically is, number one, she wasn't American, and number two, her technology, which I happen to be wearing tonight, Bluetooth technology, she created the technology that eventually led to the internet, cell phone, Bluetooth, etc., by inventing something to jam the signals for torpedoes. And but the U.S. Army said no, they weren't interested. So her technology wasn't actually used until afterwards, and it was her partner, a man whose name was on the copyright, of course, on the patent. So, but that is another interesting book if you're looking for a good read. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming out tonight to hear a little bit about what we did during World War II. And if you have any questions, as long as it's not classified information, I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much. Thank you. Are there any questions this evening?
I just want to say, we read that book about Hedy Lamarr in our book club.
Very good book.
Benedict, and it was fascinating because there was nothing you ever thought about her.
And she was so beautiful. I mean, just really gorgeous. And no one thought how brilliant she really was.
What's the name of the Hedy Lamarr book?
Is it The Only Girl in the Room or The Only Woman?
Benedict.
Okay,
Thank you. She's the author. Yeah.
It is by Marie Benedict. It's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very good book. Very good book.
Married a German because her family, because I think there was Jewish in her background.
Yes, she was.
Family was trying to protect her.
Exactly. They were trying to hide their Jewishness.
Germans kept showing up. And
Yes.
It was like right in the middle.
Exactly. It was very, very scary situation for her. She was a prisoner, really, of her own house. I mean, it was just incredible what she went through. So very, very good book, worth the read. Anyone else? Yes.
Another book we read from Erin clubs here, A Woman of No Importance. And
Oh,
Virginia Law.
yes.
That was, I mean, we talked about it in book club. The one thing we couldn't get over was her climbing over the mountain with the wooden leg.
Exactly. I mean, men had trouble, with all their limbs, had trouble going over that trip. I mean, just in the wintertime, just awful. I'm so happy I didn't ever have to do it myself. But I heard the horror stories, and to think that she did this with a wooden leg is just absolutely incredible. And then only to be arrested and thrown in prison when she arrived. I mean, just terrible. So, any other questions?
sorry, what was the name of that one?
A Woman of No Importance.
No importance.
Thank you.
Just a comment. It's just too bad these women haven't been more recognized. There's a huge display down in New Orleans, the World War II Museum. don't think they mention women's role very much, do they?
Well,
Huge museum,
I there.
very small display.
I think because these things were only recently declassified within the last 10 years or so, I think you'll see more. You see the series Bletchley Park. There's a Call to Spy. So you're starting to see more of this, and I think eventually that will work its way into the museums.
I know I read
Yes,
a book about the women that did the radios.
yes,
And also the
and the
women that-
Enigma
Yeah, and then
radios.
there
Yes,
was the women that flew airplanes, and they weren't allowed to fly in the war,
Yes.
but they could transport.
yes, they ran
People
transport.
and things within the United States, and they drove soldiers, flew soldiers around, but they couldn't be in combat. So there are a lot of things coming
It's like
out.
women, hidden women, like during the war.
Yes.
Because the men were all fighting, and all of a sudden they needed the women, and they were the ones building the planes and doing all.
Exactly, exactly.
So we only Rosie the Riveter, but we didn't know about all these underlying things that are all coming out now.
Yes, because also women weren't encouraged to talk about these things after the war. You were encouraged to be quiet. You weren't supposed to say anything. You went back to being a wife and mother, and that was all.
They said recently that a lot of British women too, families didn't find out they were involved in it until after they passed away, because they took that oath, even the Bletchley women, so seriously.
Yes.
That they didn't ever tell anyone where they worked.
There's another spy that you might want to read about, and you can actually see an interview with her. Her name was Odette. That was her code name. No, that wasn't her code name. Her name was Odette Sanson. Sansom. She was French. And she was captured by the Gestapo. They pulled out all of her fingernails and things. Oh, I mean, just awful, awful. And they did do an interview with her. And she was recognized. I mean, she did win some awards and things like that. But it's very interesting to watch. I think the interview's from like the 1970s or something. But she was living in England at the time. So, yeah, it's very interesting. So there's a lot to learn. So thank you so much for coming tonight, everyone. Thank you. And thank you to Erin for organizing. Thank you.